It has been argued that Wisconsin is a swing state. Anything can happen here in any given statewide election. I say this because many people in this room seem to have forgotten that Republican Governor Scott Walker served 2 consecutive terms and was victorious in a recall election not that long ago. Legendary Republican Governor Tommy Thompson was elected to 4 consecutive terms in most of our lifetimes. In fact, Mr. Speaker, since statehood, Wisconsin has been led by a whopping 31 Republican governors compared to a modest 13 Democrat governors. Given the historic trend, Mr. Speaker, if I were a Democrat in this legislature, I would absolutely be voting in favor of Assembly Joint Resolution 112, especially if I was a Democrat certain that I would be in the majority soon. Because, Mr. Speaker, history tells us Wisconsin will have another Republican governor sooner than later. Back in my middle school civics class, Mr. Speaker, I recall asking the teacher why my Democrat aunts and uncles were so off the rails angry at Governor Thompson. We were learning how the 3 branches of government were designed to check and balance each other. Mr. Levis explained how the governor had cleverly used the Vanna White veto to slice and dice the legislature's state budget bill. Tommy Thompson's use of the partial veto to override the idea and intent of the legislature in the law was considered egregious by his opposition and brilliant by his supporters. I myself remember thinking it didn't seem right. It seemed to me that the partial veto flat out broke the rules of the fundamental thing we had just learned. The legislature makes laws, not the governor, Mr. Speaker. I was truly befuddled. However, when Governor Evers used the partial veto to institute a 402-year tax increase on the hardworking people of Wisconsin, he was lauded by some as a genius. I imagine, Mr. Speaker, if this had been done by Governor Walker or Governor Thompson, the same people would be triggered into dramatic meltdowns of injustice. I can just hear the cry of tyranny and dictatorship, and my personal favorite, let the court decide. Personally, I would have opposed this action no matter who took it. The bottom line is the governor is not a legislature and should not be abusing the partial veto to act as a legislator. I find myself befuddled yet again, Mr. Speaker. We hear the cry to save democracy, and yet the same people are all too willing to hand over legislative authority to the executive and the judiciary when the system doesn't work to benefit them. AJR 112 proposes an amendment to the Wisconsin Constitution to restrict the governor in exercising partial veto power over an appropriations bill from creating or increasing or authorizing the creation or increase of any tax or fee. Simple as that. We narrowly crafted this legislation to address specific situations that we believe members of the public find the most egregious. The ability of a single person to create or raise taxes and fees on the people of Wisconsin with the stroke of a pen. The people of Wisconsin deserve transparency and integrity from the office of the executive. Their will should not be twisted and bent by the governor's partial veto power. They should not be subjected to political trickery that is in conflict with their will. And as we all agree, Mr. Speaker, the will of the people is the law of the land, not the will of the governor. So, Mr. Speaker, over time there have been nearly 30 attempts by both Democrat and Republican legislatures to modify the partial veto power by constitutional amendment. It's a mechanism that has invited unnecessary conflict between the legislative and executive branches for nearly a century. If adopted, this amendment would appropriately rebalance power between the executive and the legislature and further restrict the executive from completely rewriting laws. It is time we get it right. It's time that we are the ones to have the courage to restore true representation in taxation. So, Mr. Speaker, I wonder what the vote will look like today. With all the grandstanding speeches we've heard of late about fairness and saving democracy and the will of the people, will we see hypocrisy on display or common sense? Knowing that Wisconsin is a swing state, Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to think, what might the impact of the partial veto be by the next governor? Who might that next governor be? Think of that before you vote. Could it be an ally? Could it be an adversary? Maybe it'll be Josh Call. Maybe it would be Mike Gallagher. Or maybe, Mr. Speaker, it might even be me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.